Putin seems to be walking back his own government statements about his willingness to attack the West. But is this just more deception from old Vladdy Daddy, or is he really starting to think through what it means to take on NATO? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is the overall story, right? This is a statement from President Vladimir Putin when addressing a collection of Russian fighter pilots. And what he said was, I thought, a really interesting sort of walking around this core issue about the Russia's willingness to attack NATO. Right? Some key statements, some key takeaways. He said their statements, probably referring to, people like me and other news reports, said their statements about our alleged intention to attack Europe after Ukraine is sheer nonsense, Putin said late Wednesday. And that's referring to, warnings that the U.S. and Western Europe intelligence agencies that Russia could turn its sights on other countries unless it's stopped. Now, here's what's interesting. He noted that the U.S. defense budget is more than 10 times higher than Russia's. He said, quote, in view of that, how are we going to wage a war against NATO? It's ravings, he told military pilots during a visit to their base. And that, I thought, is really telling because he's explicitly saying what his biggest roadblock is. And that's the United States, which is interesting because we know that Russia clearly has, at least since 2016, had a preferred candidate in the U.S. elections where they have tried to back that candidate on the belief, and frankly, what we've seen is the correct belief that that candidate will be less likely to confront Russian, we'll call them policy goals within Europe. Now, this is, of course, almost certainly going to happen in 2024. We've heard from other stories, for example, the NSA, that Russian disinformation is ramping up. Let's see if I can find this actual story here. My internet's being just a little slow, but no, interesting. It's not here. But the NSA chief did, I covered this in a recent video, acknowledge that there's a lot of Russian AI-powered disinformation that's already ramping up going into the U.S. election. So the fact is that, at least to Putin, the number one concern in his mind is the U.S. And if he can get a U.S. administration that explicitly or implicitly says they're not going to back Europe, either with the U.S. nuclear umbrella or with the large defense spending that the U.S. has, and that sort of enables our European partners to spend less, right? Why buy a gun when your neighbor has 50 guns? Well, that might change the math if Putin believes that the U.S. isn't going to show up. Now, what's classic Russian fear-mongering, Putin says, quote, F-16s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, and we will also need to take that into account while organizing our combat operations. Now, this is almost certainly a farce because, again, Putin knows that we would never in a gazillion years give Ukraine nuclear weapons, and Ukraine does not really have the technical or budgetary ability to produce their own nuclear weapons. So the idea that F-16s could even conceivably carry nuclear weapons is a little preposterous, but what's interesting is that Putin does say, though, that any F-16s, let's see if I can find the exact phrasing, is pretty weird. He warned that any Western airbase hosting U.S. F-16s slated for deployment to Ukraine would be, quote, a legitimate target for the Kremlin's forces. This is interesting because notice his phrasing here, or the phrasing that's being reported. Again, this is translated to Russian, and it's not even a direct quote from English. But if this is indeed an accurate representation of a statement, any Western airbase implies that if there are F-16s slated for Ukraine in a Polish airbase or in a German airbase, that they are a legitimate target for Kremlin forces, which is troubling because if that is true, then that means that you are planning on attacking NATO. So you can't be like, we're not going to attack NATO, but we will fire weapons at NATO air bases. Guys, I've got news for you. That's the same thing. This is just classic. This is why you can put so little stock in the statements of the Russian public, right? The Russian, like, Kremlin leadership class. The Soviets were notorious for this, for just saying things that were objectively untrue, because like the U.S., because the U.S. was subject to elections, there had to be like a sort of, it was like true but heavily spun, right? You couldn't necessarily just be like, there's no missiles in Cuba. Like that, it just wasn't going to work, right? Because if it came out that you were lying about missiles in Cuba, you would just have a problem. The Soviets don't have these election problems. They don't care what their public thinks. So they can sit there and be like, we don't know what you're talking about. Missiles, Cuba? Where is Cuba? I've never heard of that country. And they're like, guys, we see a Soviet ship. We have photos of your missiles there. You're flying a Soviet flag on the base. Like, you know, but this is, so when you see these sort of statements from former KGB agent Vladimir Putin, just take them and throw them out the window, right? Putin said right up until the invasion of Ukraine that they were not planning on invading Ukraine. Now, Putin does correctly identify that F-16s, right, he says won't change the situation on the battlefield. And it's true. 50 F-16s, they're not super weapons. They're not wonder weapons. You know, they will be effective tools for Ukraine to use. But the fact is that air superiority isn't really achievable in this conflict right now, right? There's a lot of man pads. Neither side is able to really get much combat power out into the air. And again, this article says Russia has maintained air dominance in war with Ukraine. That's not correct at all. Air dominating the airspace is a doctrinal term, and we know that Russia does not apply because, well, you guys know, Russia keeps losing aircraft, right? Including one being shot down over Sevastopol. But we've seen 15, 20 aircraft shot down over Kherson. We've seen dozens of aircraft taken out by Patriot missile batteries. So to sit there and even have the gall to argue that the airspace is owned by Russia is pretty comical. It's just not true. No one owns the airspace. That's the point, is that each side's sort of air defenses cancel each other out, and ensuring that nobody fully owns the airspace, and that the only things that can really operate in this sort of strange new environment are small scale drones, right? So anyway, guys, if you're interested in seeing some combat footage, especially what we took a look at is the drop from Civdiv of the Foreign Legion sniper in Bakhmut. We actually got drone footage of the people he's shooting at, which is absolutely crazy. Something that I've never seen in combat before. Footage from the sniper and from the target. That is on combatvetnews.com. This is also the best way to support the channel. The reason this video is late is because I spent 40 minutes recording a video, taking this awesome look into like a secret drone unit for Ukraine. And then it gets immediately demonetized. Immediately. And it's a news report. Like it's released by the Ukrainian government, right? You're like, it's not that secret a drone unit. Guys, it was secret. They declassified it like a few days ago. The point is that there is nothing here that needs to be demonetized. But that's how YouTube is now, right? Even basic information. I think it's because the candidate that YouTube would prefer to see win the election, Ukraine is a massive sore point for them. And instead of addressing the issues, YouTube would just rather be like, don't think about it. Don't think about the failure of the U.S. to support our allies. Like, don't think about it. Just keep watching Mr. Beast videos. But anyway, if you want to support me, if you want to support what I do, any one of these tiers will do it. The Combat Vet News, it's owned by me. I control everything that's on there. There is no demonetized videos. There's no deleted videos because it's my site. And they drop twice a week. So if you want that and you want to support what I do, check it out. Of course, a huge thank you to the Colonel tier members, the Lieutenant tier members, and give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll get updates even when it's they're demonetized videos that the algorithm spikes. Anyway, see you guys in the next one. Cheers.